What's the angriest you've ever been at a stranger? I was a block from my apartment when I heard a wolf whistle followed by quickening steps. I slammed into the glass door. Daniel! Let me in! Someone's following me! He didn't even look up from his computer. Can't let anyone in without proper verification. Building protocol. I live in apartment 6B. Please. The man who'd jumped me was walking now, not running. My left eye was swelling shut from where he'd grabbed me in the alley. That's when Daniel finally glanced up. You know how many people try to tailgate in here? He tapped his perfect record certificate. 5 years. 0 security incidents. My promotion goes through Monday. The footsteps were getting closer. I could see him now under the streetlight, and there was something glinting in his hand. Please look at him. He has a knife. Could be anything. Could be keys. Daniel went back to his computer. I'm not throwing away my perfect record for some girl drama. The adrenaline was wearing off and the pain was setting in. I pressed my bloody hand against the glass. Does this look fake to you? TikTokers use fake blood all the time. More realistic than the movies now. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my ID. Blood made everything slippery. Look! That's my driver's license. Same address. He waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, right. That could be anyone's. Miss Lee from 1C appeared in the lobby, her little dog on a leash. Daniel, that's the girl from 6B. I see her every morning. Ma'am, please step back. You don't know what she did to provoke this situation. Provoke? I couldn't believe this. All I did was reject him. The man in the hoodie had stopped 20 feet away. His smile sent a chill up my spine. He knew Daniel wouldn't open that door. My vision started getting fuzzy around the edges. My mail. There's a package from Amazon right there behind you. Public information. Anyone can track packages. A young couple came out of the elevator. The woman gasped when she saw me. Oh my gosh! Let her in now. Touch that door and you're both evicted. I have that authority during security situations. The man pulled out his phone. I'm calling 911. They're 20 minutes away, Daniel said without missing a beat. I already called them, following proper protocol. Beep, beep, beep. Someone pulled the fire alarm. Daniel typed a code into his phone and it went silent immediately. False alarms are $500 fines. Who did that? That's when the attacker moved again. But slow this time, like he was enjoying this. He's coming! I screamed, pounding on the door. My bloody handprints overlapping like some horror movie poster. The teenager from the second floor, Lucas, grabbed his skateboard. I'm breaking the window. Daniel stood up so fast his chair rolled back. That's destruction of property. Your parents will get the bill. $10,000. You want that? She's dying, Lucas yelled. She's being dramatic. The attacker was 10 feet away now, close enough that I could see his face. He stopped at the broken buzzer panel and laughed, then looked right at Daniel through the glass and gave him a thumbs up. See? Daniel said to the growing crowd. They know each other. I'm not getting involved in that mess. That's when he dropped the knife on the sidewalk. He bent down and cleaned it on his jeans. That's a knife! Miss Lee screamed. That's a real knife! My legs gave out. I slid down the door, leaving a red trail on the glass. Everything was going dark around the edges. My mouth felt full of copper. Please. I couldn't make my voice work anymore, just mouthing the word against the glass. The couple was fighting Daniel for the door handle now. He shoved them back. My perfect record. You don't understand. My wife is pregnant. We need this promotion. The attacker knelt down next to me and grabbed a handful of my hair. Don't do it, someone inside whispered. He lifted my head. SLAM. The glass cracked. Slam. Blood sprayed across the door, painting the entrance like modern art. I couldn't see anymore. Open the door! Everyone was screaming now. The glass alone is $8,000 to replace. He's leaving. Look, he's walking away. No need to open it now. The last thing I heard before everything went black was Daniel's voice. See? The threat has passed. I maintained protocol. Perfect record intact. I woke up 3 days later with 62 stitches. Traumatic brain injury that gives me seizures now. They never caught the attack, and Daniel got his promotion. The building management even sent out an email praising his dedication to security protocols. But here's the thing about apartment buildings. Everyone has a key. Everyone knows which door is his, and everyone was angry. The first thing I noticed was the beeping. My eyes wouldn't open right, and my head felt like someone was hammering nails into it. The nurse checking my IV bag told me I'd been out for 3 days. She pointed to the mirror they'd propped on my tray table, and I saw why my face felt so tight. 62 stitches ran from my left temple down to my jaw where the glass had cut me. The nurse explained the doctor was worried about seizures because of how many times my head hit the door. My throat hurt so bad I could barely swallow, and she said that was from all the screaming. A detective showed up that afternoon with a notebook and tired eyes. He asked me to describe the attacker, but the pain meds made everything fuzzy. I remembered the hoodie and the knife, but not his face clearly. The detective kept looking at his phone while I talked and finally said they'd do their best. But without good footage or witnesses who saw his face, it would be hard. He wouldn't look at me when he said that. Dr. Heath Schmid came by the next morning with a clipboard full of papers about my brain injury. He said I'd need special medicine to prevent seizures for at least a year. Then he started listing everything I couldn't do anymore. No driving because a seizure could cause a crash. No swimming alone in case I had one in the water. No using certain machines at my job that could hurt me if I lost control. Each thing he said made my world smaller. My phone buzzed on the nightstand and I saw an email from building management. They were praising Daniel for his exemplary adherence to security protocols during a challenging situation. I threw up right into the pink hospital basin. The nurse said head injuries could cause nausea, but we both knew that wasn't why. Miss Lee showed up that evening with yellow roses and her little dog tucked in her purse even though the sign said no pets allowed. She sat on the edge of my bed and whispered that every single tenant she'd talked to was mad about what happened. Her hand shook when she held mine and she kept saying she should have done more. 8 days after the attack, I had to go back to get my medicine and some clean clothes. My legs locked up the second I saw Daniel sitting at his desk through the glass door. He looked up when I walked in and just stared through me like I was invisible. I made it to the elevator before my chest got tight and I couldn't breathe. I sat on the floor between the second and sixth floor for 20 minutes trying to stop shaking. When I called building management to file a complaint, the woman on the phone sounded like she was reading from a script. She said Daniel had followed all established protocols, and security personnel couldn't make exceptions based on emotional appeals. I put her on speaker and recorded the whole thing on my phone. The medical bills started showing up a week later. $12,000 already, and the neurologist said I'd need scans every 3 months. My lease had 10 months left, and breaking it would cost 3 months rent up front. I made a spreadsheet of all the costs versus what I had saved, and the numbers made me cry. Lucas knocked on my door with his parents standing behind him looking uncomfortable. He couldn't stop apologizing for not breaking the window that night. His mom said he'd been having nightmares, and his therapist thought talking to me might help. I told him it wasn't his fault, but we both knew he'd think about that skateboard in his hand for the rest of his life. I sent a formal request for the lobby security footage using the tenant rights form I found online. Management wrote back saying the footage was under review for quality issues, which sounded like lawyer talk for deciding whether to delete it. I typed myself an email with the date and their exact words in case I needed proof later. 3 weeks later, I was picking out apples at the grocery store when the lights got too bright and everything started spinning. My hand went numb and the apple rolled away as I hit the floor hard. My body started shaking and I couldn't control it. The produce guy ran over and turned me on my side while someone else called 911. A woman held my head steady and kept talking to me even though I couldn't answer. More people gathered around to help block the view from other shoppers. The paramedics got there in 8 minutes and stayed with me until the shaking stopped. They helped me onto the stretcher, and one of them said she'd seen this before with head injuries. The whole time these strangers showed more concern than Daniel had when I was bleeding at that door. My boss called the next day while I was still foggy from the seizure. He talked about accommodation options, but what he really meant was unpaid leave. The medical bills were already crushing me and rent was due in 2 weeks. He kept saying the company needed someone reliable for the position. We went back and forth for 20 minutes before settling on reduced hours. Every compromise felt like something else Daniel had stolen from me by not opening that door. I couldn't work the morning shift anymore because the medication made me too drowsy. They moved me to afternoon data entry where I wouldn't interact with clients. The pay cut meant choosing between groceries and the electric bill some weeks. I found Claire Perry's name on a legal website for premises liability cases. Her office was on the 4th floor of an old building downtown. She listened to my whole story without interrupting once. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, Daniel's refusal could be gross negligence. She explained that multiple witnesses saw him refuse to help a resident in distress. For the first time since the attack, someone with power believed this wasn't okay. Claire pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing everything down. She told me to document every single thing from now on. Every seizure with the date and time and who witnessed it. Every medical appointment with the doctor's name and what they said. Every email or call with building management and their exact words. She handed me a symptom journal with columns for tracking everything. She also gave me an expense tracker to log every penny this was costing me. The structure of having something to do every day made me feel less helpless. 2 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. The voice said his name was Raj Zimmerman, and he was a journalist. Another tenant had told him about what happened, and he was investigating something bigger. He said he was looking at how companies use metrics to override basic human decency. He wanted to understand what happened that night and what came after. I agreed to talk if he didn't use my name at first. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital where I had another appointment. He recorded everything on his phone and took notes in a small notebook. He asked detailed questions about Daniel's exact words and the timeline of events. He seemed especially interested in how fast Daniel silenced the fire alarm. Someone in the building created an anonymous post about the attack on our Facebook group. Within hours, tenants started sharing their own stories about Daniel. An old man couldn't get in during a blizzard last winter. A mom with a screaming baby was left outside for 10 minutes. A woman in a wheelchair was denied entry when her card reader broke. The stories kept coming, and suddenly I was getting messages from neighbors I'd never met. We started a private group chat that grew to 15 people in 2 days. Everyone had a Daniel story, and everyone was mad. Lucas knocked on my door on a Saturday morning looking like he hadn't slept. His parents were behind him but stayed in the hallway. He couldn't stop apologizing for not breaking the window with his skateboard. His mom said he'd been having nightmares about that night. His therapist thought talking to me might help him process the guilt. I told him it wasn't his fault, but we both knew he'd carry this forever. He asked if he could write a witness statement even though his parents didn't want him involved. His mom started to object, but his dad put his hand on her shoulder. Lucas said he needed to do something to make it right. I gave him Claire's contact information and watched the 16-year-old kid find his courage. The persistent auras started 2 days before my next appointment with Dr. Schmid. Lights would leave trails when I moved my head too fast. He adjusted my medication again and explained that brain injury recovery wasn't linear. We might need to try several combinations before finding what worked. The new pills made me drowsy, but at least the room stopped spinning. He scheduled another scan for the following month to check for changes. Raj called me a week later with an update on his investigation. He'd filed public records requests for the 911 calls from that night. He also requested the fire alarm logs to see how fast Daniel really silenced it. He explained these requests often revealed patterns that organizations tried to hide. The city had 45 days to respond, but sometimes took longer. We'd have to wait at least 3 weeks for any real information. Meanwhile, Claire was moving on the legal front with building management. She sent a formal preservation letter demanding they maintain all security footage and records. The certified mail receipt showed Will Proctor signed for it himself. She explained this meant they couldn't claim ignorance if evidence suddenly disappeared. The letter also put them on notice that we were prepared to take legal action. Every step forward felt small, but they were adding up to something bigger. Miss Lee knocked on my door the next morning holding a yellow legal pad covered in notes. She'd spent 3 hours on the phone with the state licensing board learning about their complaint process. Her handwriting was neat and tiny as she showed me the key part she'd underlined twice. Security personnel in our state have to preserve life and safety above all other considerations according to their licensing requirements. She'd already started a spreadsheet with dates and names of tenants who'd been refused help by Daniel. The elderly man from 3rd floor who couldn't get in during last winter's blizzard was first on her list. Then came the single mom from 5A whose keycard stopped working while her baby screamed in the cold. Miss Lee had 12 incidents documented already, and said more people were coming forward every day. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from someone calling themselves Maintenance Anon. They'd attached screenshots of the building's security system logs from the night of my attack. The timestamp showed Daniel's keycard silencing the fire alarm in exactly 12 seconds. Another log entry showed he never checked any camera feeds or emergency exits before turning it off. He just heard the alarm and immediately shut it down to avoid the fine. I forwarded everything to Claire, who called me within minutes. She kept saying this was the smoking gun we needed because it proved Daniel prioritized money over checking if someone needed help. The logs also showed he'd done this 16 other times in the past year, always silencing alarms in under 20 seconds without any safety checks. 2 days later, Will Proctor called Claire's office with a settlement offer. 3 months free rent if I signed an NDA and dropped all claims against the building. Claire put him on speaker so I could hear his nervous voice explaining this was a generous offer given the circumstances. She muted our side and shook her head at me before unmuting to tell him the offer was insulting. But we countered with demands for full security footage from that night plus all building records related to Daniel's employment. Proctor stammered something about needing to check with corporate and hung up. Claire said his panic meant they were scared of what else might come out. The tenant group chat exploded to 37 members within a week. Everyone had a Daniel story and they all followed the same pattern. He'd use protocol as a weapon to deny basic human help. The woman in the wheelchair from 2B couldn't get in when the card reader broke, and Daniel made her wait 40 minutes for maintenance instead of just opening the door. A delivery driver having an asthma attack was told to wait outside because he wasn't a tenant. An elderly man fell on the sidewalk right in front of the door, and Daniel wouldn't leave his desk to help because it was outside the building. Each story made my stomach hurt worse because this wasn't about one bad night anymore. This was years of cruelty hiding behind rules. Claire scheduled Daniel's deposition for the following month, and I sat in the conference room watching him through the glass partition. He wore a cheap suit and kept touching his wedding ring while the court reporter set up her machine. When Claire started asking questions, his answers made my skin crawl. He talked about his pregnant wife needing the promotion money for their new apartment. He explained that people try to manipulate security guards with fake emergencies all the time. He used the phrase emotional manipulation 4 times in 20 minutes. When Claire asked about my bloody handprints on the glass, he said, "Blood doesn't automatically mean someone's telling the truth." He mentioned TikTok pranks and crisis actors and people trying to get viral videos. He genuinely believed he'd done the right thing by keeping me out. He said he was protecting the building from an unknown threat, meaning me. The woman begging for her life was the threat in his mind, not the man with the knife. 3 weeks passed before the tenant meeting about building safety. I almost didn't go, but Lila from 4B convinced me it was important to show up. The community room was packed with 40 people all talking at once about Daniel and building security. I sat in the back trying to stay invisible when suddenly my vision started doing that weird tunnel thing. The fluorescent lights left trails when I moved my head and I knew what was coming. My hand started shaking first, then my whole arm. Someone screamed when I hit the floor and my body went rigid. I could hear everything but couldn't respond while my muscles locked and released over and over. Lila pushed through the crowd and turned me on my side while timing the seizure on her phone. She kept everyone back and stayed calm the whole time, talking to me even though I couldn't answer. When it finally stopped after 3 minutes, she helped me sit up slowly and checked my vitals with practiced efficiency. She was a registered nurse and knew exactly what to do. That night, she started organizing a tenant safety network where people could call each other for help instead of relying on building security. She created phone trees and buddy systems and emergency protocols that actually prioritized helping people. My seizure had shown everyone how vulnerable we all were. Raj's article came out the next week without using names, but with enough detail that everyone knew which building he meant. The headline read, "When Protocol Matters More Than People," and it got shared 12,000 times in 2 days. He'd interviewed 7 tenants and 2 witnesses plus 3 security experts who all said Daniel had violated basic duty of care standards. The article included a sidebar about how metrics-based performance reviews can create perverse incentives where workers prioritize statistics over human life. Daniel's 5-year perfect record had become more important than a woman bleeding to death at his door. Comments poured in from people sharing similar stories from their buildings and workplaces. Daniel became the face of bureaucratic cruelty, even though Raj hadn't used his name. Building management started their retaliation 2 days after the article went viral. Everyone who'd spoken at the tenant meeting got inspection notices slipped under their doors. Miss Lee received 3 noise complaints even though her dog weighs 4 pounds. Lucas's parents got cited for a parking violation in their assigned spot. The couple who'd tried to help me suddenly had maintenance entering their apartment for emergency checks every other day. Claire documented every single incident in a folder labeled retaliation evidence. She said this pattern of harassment would strengthen our case because it showed consciousness of guilt. They wouldn't be trying this hard to silence people if they thought they'd done nothing wrong. Discovery produced a goldmine when Proctor's emails landed in Claire's inbox. The insurance company was freaking out about potential liability and pushing him to resolve the situation before more claims surfaced. One email said Daniel should be reassigned to a non-public facing role to minimize exposure. Another mentioned the PR nightmare if this went to trial. The insurance adjuster calculated that keeping Daniel in the lobby could cost them millions in future lawsuits. They weren't moving him because it was right, but because their spreadsheet said it was cheaper. The emails showed they'd known about complaints against Daniel for 2 years, but kept him in place because he never let unauthorized people in. My therapist started helping me prepare for the victim impact statement I'd have to read if this went to trial. We practiced in her office with me reading it out loud while she timed my breathing. The first time I couldn't get through the first paragraph without crying. She taught me grounding techniques to use when I felt overwhelmed. Touch 5 things, name 4 things I could see, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, 1 thing I could taste. We practiced every week, and each time I got a little further before breaking down. She said trauma changes how our brains process memory and emotion. Reading about the worst night of my life would always be hard, but I could learn to manage the feelings. By the 6th practice, I made it through the whole statement, only stopping twice to breathe through the panic. The next week, Claire scheduled me for neuropsychological testing at a clinic downtown, where they ran me through hours of memory games and reaction tests and pattern matching exercises. The doctor made me repeat number sequences and draw clocks and name objects while a timer ticked away on her desk. She asked me to remember 3 words, then tested me on them 20 minutes later, but I could only get 1. The computer tests were worse with flashing lights that made my head pound and buttons I had to press when certain shapes appeared, but my fingers moved too slow. After 4 hours, she printed out a report showing my processing speed was in the 20th percentile now, and my working memory scored even lower. The graphs looked like a mountain range with all the valleys showing where my brain couldn't keep up anymore. Claire said the documentation would help our case, but seeing my broken brain laid out in percentages and charts made me throw up in the clinic bathroom. 2 weeks later, we sat in a conference room for Daniel's deposition with a court reporter typing every word while he answered questions in his security uniform like he was still on duty. Claire asked him about the fire alarm, and he admitted typing his code in right away without checking any exits or cameras first. He said he could see the attacker clearly through the glass, and yes, he saw the knife, and yes, he heard me screaming for help. When she asked why he didn't open the door, he straightened his shoulders and said he was protecting the building from an unknown threat, which meant me bleeding on the doorstep. Claire made him repeat 3 times that he chose protocol over helping a woman begging for her life, and each time he said it, prouder like it proved he was right. The security company's technician came in next with printouts showing Daniel's login timestamps from that night. The data proved he silenced the alarm in 12 seconds, which wasn't enough time to check anything like he claimed. The technician explained their system logs every action, and Daniels showed he never accessed the camera feeds or checked any other doors before deciding not to help me. He pulled up more logs showing Daniel had the fastest alarm silence time of any guard in the company, which he'd bragged about in emails to his supervisor. The evidence was so clear that even the company lawyer looked uncomfortable as their own system proved Daniel was lying about investigating before making his choice. 3 days later in therapy, I was talking about the attack, when suddenly I remembered the attacker giving Daniel that thumbs up and laughing. The memory hit me so hard I started shaking, and my therapist had to walk me through breathing exercises to calm down. She said trauma memories often come back in pieces, and this detail showed how the attacker understood Daniel wouldn't help, which meant institutional failure enabled individual violence. We spent the rest of the session processing how Daniel's reputation for never letting anyone in might have actually encouraged my attacker to be bolder, knowing I'd be trapped outside. Management's lawyer called Claire the next morning with a settlement offer that would cover my medical bills plus some extra if I signed an NDA agreeing never to discuss what happened. The number was big enough to pay everything I owed, but signing meant I could never warn other women about that building or tell anyone how Daniel left me to die. Claire said I had 24 hours to decide, and I spent them staring at my bills versus my conscience. The money would fix my immediate problems, but staying quiet felt like betraying everyone who might face the same thing. I called Claire back and said no, which made her proud, but my bank account screamed at me for weeks afterward. Meanwhile, Raj was fighting with his editors about naming the building, and Daniel specifically in his follow-up article since he had enough sources and documents to back everything up. His editor worried about getting sued, but Raj argued that public safety outweighed litigation risk, and people deserved to know which building had a guard who would watch them die rather than break protocol. After 2 weeks of back and forth, they agreed to run it with legal review, which meant 3 lawyers reading every word, but at least the truth would get out. Lila knocked on my door that weekend with a stack of papers and a plan to take our complaints to the community board since building management wasn't listening. She'd already gotten over 200 signatures on a petition demanding concrete safety changes and had scheduled us to speak at the next public meeting. The petition included specific demands like removing guards who refused to help in emergencies and installing emergency override buttons tenants could reach from outside. Seeing all those signatures from neighbors who cared enough to sign made me cry for the first time in weeks. But these were different tears than before. The community board meeting was in a middle school auditorium that smelled like floor wax and old lunches, but it was packed with people holding signs about tenant safety. When they called my name, I walked to the microphone on shaky legs and told the whole story from the wolf whistle to waking up with stitches, while everyone listened in complete silence. My voice cracked when I described Daniel watching my attacker slam my head into the glass, but I got through all of it without stopping. When I finished, you could hear people crying before the whole room erupted in applause that went on. So long, the board chair had to call for order 3 times. The board members looked genuinely disturbed, with one woman putting her hand over her mouth when I described the blood on the glass. 2 days later, Daniel released a statement through his lawyer calling himself a victim of cancel culture who was persecuted for following established protocols. He claimed he was being made a scapegoat for doing his job correctly, and that I was trying to destroy his life because I regretted my own choices that night. The response online was so harsh that building management put out their own statement saying they were reviewing all security procedures and couldn't comment on personnel matters, which everyone knew meant they were backing away from Daniel fast. That afternoon, Dr. Schmid called me in early because I'd reported increased light sensitivity triggering more episodes at work. He adjusted my medication again, trying a new combination with fewer side effects, and within a week I could finally read for more than 20 minutes without the words swimming around. Small victories mattered now when everything else felt like fighting quicksand. But being able to read again meant I could review legal documents myself instead of relying on Claire to explain everything. The tenant group chat pinged with a new message from a woman on the 3rd floor who said, Daniel refused to call 911 last month when her 4-year-old son's throat started closing from a peanut allergy. She'd begged him to help while fumbling with her EpiPen, but he kept saying medical emergencies weren't security matters and she should handle it herself. Her neighbor had to drive them to the hospital while her son turned blue in the back seat. More stories poured in after hers, each one worse than the last, and I screenshot everything for Claire's files. Raj called that afternoon saying he'd finally gotten the 911 audio through his public records request and wanted me to hear it before his article ran tomorrow. Daniel's voice on the recording was calm and bored as he told dispatch 20 minutes after the attack started that someone might need medical attention outside, but he couldn't verify if it was real or not. The dispatcher asked if the person was conscious, and Daniel said he couldn't tell from inside and wouldn't go check because that wasn't his job. Raj's article went live at 6 a.m., naming the building, Daniel, and management company with quotes from 12 tenants and the full 911 transcript. Within hours, Daniel's name was trending locally with people sharing their own stories about security guards who chose rules over helping. My phone buzzed nonstop with interview requests I ignored while taking my new seizure meds that made everything taste like metal. 3 days later, a courier knocked with an official envelope from the building's lawyers threatening to sue me for defamation if I didn't stop spreading false and malicious statements. Claire laughed when she read it and filed something called an anti-slap motion that basically told them to back off because I had the right to talk about what happened to me. She attached all our evidence, including the 911 recording and witness statements, and within a week, they withdrew their threat without another word. Then Daniel decided to fight back by filing his own complaint with the tenant board, claiming I was harassing him by organizing other residents against him. His 3-page letter blamed me for his marriage problems, since his pregnant wife was stressed about people recognizing him from the news articles. He actually wrote that I was ruining his life by refusing to accept that he'd just been doing his job correctly that night. The process server found me at work the next Friday with Daniel's actual lawsuit claiming emotional distress and demanding $50,000 in damages. My hands shook so bad I dropped the papers and had to sit on the floor of the break room while my coworker called Claire for me. She drove over immediately and explained this was just desperation from someone who couldn't accept responsibility, and she'd file for immediate dismissal with sanctions against him for wasting the court's time. The hearing got scheduled for 3 weeks out, which meant 3 more weeks of panic attacks every time I thought about facing him in court. Meanwhile, Lila had been working on practical solutions and created a buddy system where tenants would meet each other at the corner and walk in together during Daniel's shifts. She made a schedule grid and posted it in the mailroom so people could sign up for escort times, and within 2 days, every slot had volunteers. The network meant nobody had to face Daniel alone anymore, even though management still refused to reassign him. Dr. Schmid wrote a formal letter requesting building access modifications as a medical accommodation for my TBI since the stress of seeing Daniel triggered my seizures. Management wrote back saying they couldn't make exceptions to their security protocols, so Claire immediately threatened to file an ADA complaint with the federal government. Suddenly, Will Proctor called personally to discuss possible arrangements that might work for everyone. That same week, I got an email from a city council staffer saying they were holding oversight hearings about private security regulation after seeing all the coverage of my case. They wanted me to testify about the need for de-escalation training and Good Samaritan requirements for licensed security personnel. The hearing was in 2 weeks at City Hall, and they said my testimony could help change the rules for every building in the city. Miss Lee texted me a video she'd secretly recorded of Daniel the previous night when an elderly man's keycard stopped working in the rain. The old man stood there getting soaked while Daniel sat inside, refusing to manually unlock the door because the man couldn't prove he lived there even though Daniel saw him every day. She posted it on Twitter with the caption about Daniel being the worst security guard in America, and within 2 days, it had 8 million views. The comment section turned into thousands of people sharing stories about heartless security guards and tagging news outlets to cover the pattern. The building's insurance company must have seen the viral video because they sent management a letter threatening to raise premiums by 40% unless they addressed what they called significant liability exposure from security protocol issues. Will Proctor finally understood that keeping Daniel was going to cost real money, not just bad press, and money was the only language management actually spoke. 3 days later, I forced myself to walk through the lobby during Daniel's shift with Miss Lee beside me, and Lucas trailing behind us with his phone out recording everything. My hands shook, but I kept walking straight ahead while Daniel's eyes tracked me across the marble floor, and when I reached the elevator without running or hiding, he looked away first and went back to his computer screen. Claire had been working all week pulling together witness statements and security footage and medical records. And when she showed up at my apartment with 3 boxes of evidence, she spread everything across my kitchen table and walked me through each document while I took notes on sticky pads. The complaint to the state licensing board was 40 pages long with 43 supporting documents attached, including the maintenance worker's logs showing Daniel silenced the fire alarm in 12 seconds, and the 911 audio where he waited 20 minutes to call and told them someone might need medical attention. Claire drove me to the state office building where we filed everything in person, and got a stamped receipt, and the clerk behind the counter read the first page and immediately called her supervisor, who came out and promised an investigation would open that same day. 2 weeks passed before we got the letter saying an oversight hearing was scheduled for next month, and subpoenas were already going out to the building for all their security records and policies and training materials. Will Proctor called Claire's office within hours of getting his subpoena and tried to negotiate what documents they'd have to produce, but Claire told him the law required everything and hung up on him. Meanwhile, Raj had been interviewing security guards across the city and found 12 other buildings where guards had refused to help people in emergencies because of their metrics, and he published this huge investigation showing how these policies hurt people everywhere. My story was just one example in this bigger pattern where companies valued perfect records over actual safety, and the article got picked up by national outlets, and suddenly reporters were calling me asking for comments. Dr. Schmid spent a whole afternoon going through my medical records and wrote this detailed timeline showing exactly how my injuries got worse each minute. Daniel refused to open the door, and he was included brain scans showing the damage from my head hitting the glass. His report was 8 pages of medical terms I didn't understand, but Claire said it proved causation, which meant they couldn't claim my injuries would have happened anyway. And when officials read it, they'd understand Daniel's choice directly caused my brain injury. The hearing date came faster than I expected, and I sat in the back row watching Daniel take the stand first, where he still insisted he'd done nothing wrong and kept talking about his perfect record and his promotion. The hearing officer asked him directly if he prioritized his record over my safety, and Daniel actually said yes because following protocol was his job, and then he added that I'd probably done something to deserve what happened anyway. The whole room went silent, and even his own lawyer looked shocked and tried to get him to clarify, but Daniel kept digging deeper, saying women make up stories all the time for attention, and he wasn't going to risk his career for drama. When it was my turn to testify, I walked slowly to the front because the room was spinning a little from my medication. But I sat down and spoke clearly about that night, and when I needed to pause because I felt dizzy, everyone waited without rushing me. I didn't cry or yell, but just told them exactly what happened and how it felt to beg for my life while someone worried about a promotion, and when I finished, several people in the audience were wiping their eyes. 3 days after the hearing, Will Proctor sent out a building-wide email announcing Daniel was reassigned to the overnight shift at their parking garage location with no interaction with residents. And they were implementing new protocols requiring all security personnel to provide immediate assistance to anyone in distress. It wasn't enough, but at least I'd never have to see him at the front desk again, and other people wouldn't go through what I did, even though he still had a job, which made me sick. The licensing board sent their decision 2 weeks later, putting Daniel on 2-year probation with monthly supervision required and mandatory crisis intervention training that he had to pay for himself. And if he had one complaint during probation, he'd lose his license permanently. My lawyer said it was actually a strong punishment for a first offense, but it felt weak to me considering I have seizures for life because he wouldn't open a door, but at least there was some accountability. The mediation happened in a conference room downtown, where their insurance company's lawyers offered to cover all my current medical bills, plus ongoing treatment for 5 years with limited confidentiality, meaning I couldn't say the exact amount, but could still talk about what happened. Claire whispered that we could fight for more, but trials take years, and I needed the money now for my medications and therapy and missing work for appointments, so I nodded and signed the papers. The check would come in 30 days, and even though it wasn't justice, it was something real that would help me survive what Daniel's choice had done to my life. When the settlement paperwork arrived by courier 3 days later, I signed it in front of the tenant group that had gathered in Miss Lee's apartment. Some of them shook their heads when they saw the amount, but they understood when I explained how the medication costs alone were eating through my savings every month. The money meant I could stop choosing between seizure meds and groceries. 2 weeks after that, Lila called a meeting in the community room where 38 tenants showed up with notebooks and laptops. They voted in representatives for each floor and set up monthly meetings with management that Will Proctor had to attend whether he liked it or not. The escort network that started informally became an official system with a schedule posted by the mailboxes and everyone's phone numbers on a laminated card. Small changes started happening too, like better lighting by the side entrance, and a working emergency button that went straight to 911 instead of just Daniel's desk. Management approved my transfer request to Unit 1F near the side door after Claire sent them another ADA complaint thread. The movers came on a Tuesday morning, and I watched them carry my boxes past the main lobby, where Daniel still sat during day shifts, though nobody talked to him anymore. The new apartment was smaller, but I could get to my door without passing him, and that made the lost square footage worth it. My hands only shook a little when I signed the new lease. 6 months after the attack, Raj called to check in for his follow-up article. He came to my new apartment with his recorder and notepad, but mostly just listened while I talked about still having seizures twice a month, and still jumping when doors slammed and still not being able to work full time. He wrote about progress that wasn't linear, and healing that wasn't pretty, and systems that changed too slowly to save the people who needed them. His article ran with a photo of the tenant escort schedule and a quote from me about how surviving isn't the same as thriving, but sometimes it's enough. Dr. Schmidt adjusted my medication again at our appointment the following week and showed me charts of my seizure frequency dropping from daily to weekly to now just once or twice monthly. He said we'd monitor for another year, but the trajectory looked good, and maybe someday I could even try reducing the dose, though we both knew that was optimistic. I left his office with a prescription that would actually work now that I had settlement money to pay for it. 3 weeks later, I was getting my mail when footsteps echoed in the parking garage. Daniel walked past in his new overnight uniform, looking smaller somehow with dark circles under his eyes, and nobody to talk to during his shifts. The other security guards avoided him, and I heard from Miss Lee that his wife had moved back to her parents' house when she was 7 months pregnant. He saw me standing there, but just kept walking to his post in the far corner where he'd spend the next 8 hours alone watching cars. No confrontation, no dramatic words, just the quiet reality of consequences finding him one small loss at a time. That night, I sat at my laptop and typed out a post for the building's Facebook group that had grown to include former tenants and their friends who'd followed the story. I thanked everyone for the escort walks and the meeting attendance and the witness statements that helped build the case. I wrote that the attacker was never caught and probably never would be, and that some nights I still woke up feeling his hands in my hair. But I also wrote about Miss Lee bringing soup, and Lucas checking on me, and Lila organizing everyone into something stronger than management expected. I wrote that justice came in pieces, not all at once, and healing happened in community even when systems failed. I posted it and watched the comments fill with hearts, and support from people who understood that survival stories don't have clean endings. Tonight, Lila knocked on my door at exactly 7 like she did every Tuesday and Thursday to walk me to the grocery store. She waited while I grabbed my keys and wallet and the list I'd written earlier when my hands were steadier. We walked out the side entrance together and she stayed close but not too close, giving me space to unlock the door myself. My hands were steady on the key and the lock turned smooth and easy. Such a small thing, but it meant everything after months of shaking and dropping keys and needing help with basic tasks. The door opened and we stepped out into the evening air, and I was going to the store like a normal person doing normal things, even though nothing would ever be normal again. But I was here, and I was breathing, and I had neighbors who cared, and medication that worked, and a door I could open myself. In a world where security guards could watch you die for a promotion, and attackers could vanish into the night, and justice could be partial at best, those small victories mattered more than anyone watching from outside could understand. Thanks for hanging in there with me through all the questioning and wondering. Really enjoyed exploring these moments right alongside you all. Subscribe for more content like this.